Good morning. My name is Susan Reardon. I'm the staff hearing officer, and I call the meeting of Wednesday, April 27th to order. Today there's 5 items on our agenda, 2 of which are on consent calendar, or time extensions, and I haven't received any requests for continuances or postponements, so I will hear them in the order that they appear on the agenda. Under announcements and appeals, I don't have any announcements, and we've had no recent appeals. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the staff hearing officer on items not on today's agenda? And seeing no one, I'll go to the consent items. There's 2 on for time extension requests. The first one is 817 North Milpas Street. It's a request for a 2-year time extension of a tentative map that was approved by the Planning Commission in March of 2007. The second one is for also a 2-year time extension of a tentative map approved by the City Council in March of 2010 for a project at 803 North Milpas. Staff is Can you, if you guys need to talk, can you go out? Or just keep it down? No, give it over to the, thank you. Staff's recommending that the staff hearing officer approve a 1-year time extension due to potential future changes of our zoning ordinance with the zoning ordinance amendments that were now underway. So I was wondering, does the applicant have any comments that they want to add? They're okay with that recommendation? Okay. And staff's not here, but I believe they don't have any additional comments to add. Is there anyone in the audience who would actually like to talk about or address the requested time extension? Seeing no one, I have
a comment.
Okay.
Can we get real quick?
Sure.
Jarrett Gorin, Vanguard Planning, represent the owners of both those projects. And, you know, I'm familiar with all the new zoning ordinance issues, and I understand the rationale behind not wanting to extend projects indefinitely with a new zoning ordinance coming online. But these particular projects at this location, a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing in the new zoning ordinance, it doesn't really impact these projects at this location. It's cleanup items and refinement items and all. These projects were multi-use condo projects that were approved, and they're pretty consistent with everything that's in the new zoning ordinance. There's some higher densities that were approved here, and these are actually at lower densities than what you could do now. So I don't know that necessarily the 2 years would be preserving something that the city's trying to phase out as part of the NZO. So if we could get a 2-year, I don't think that that's inconsistent with what you guys are trying to do, and it would save us having to come back if we needed to.
I agree with you, and I understand what you're saying. The finding is that the project continues to be in conformance with the general plan and the zoning ordinance, and I could say that with certainty right now. I can't say that with certainty past that 1 year.
Okay.
So I agree. There are probably not going to be significant changes that would affect your project, and it may benefit you in some way. But since I can't say that with certainty, I don't feel comfortable giving a 2-year time extension.
Okay.
Okay. And this wouldn't preclude you from coming
Sure.
back in another year and requesting the additional year if necessary.
Yeah, all right. No problem.
Okay. Great. So I'll close the public hearing. I agree with staff's recommendation regarding the 1-year time extension. So for 117 North Milpas, the new expiration of the tentative map would be March 15 of 2017. And for 803 North Milpas, it will be March 23rd of 2017. My action is actually appealable to the City Council per the MAP Act, and the appeal period is 15 days. So if an appeal was filed, Megan would contact you, Jarrett. Okay. So we'll move to the first item. If the planner and applicants would like to come up, it's 117 North Milpas Street. Okay, great. Okay, great, thank you. Okay. Anytime you're ready, Andrew.
project before you is located at 711 North Milpas Street. It's the intersection of Milpas and Ortega Street. The application is a request of a modification for parking requirements. Am I not on?
Nope, you're muted.
No, I'm muted. Excuse me. So as I said, the project is at 711 North Milpas Street at the intersection of Milpas and Ortega Streets. The application before you is a request for a modification of both the parking requirement for the commercial component of this mixed-use development that's proposed, as well as to allow parking in the front setback. That's the front setback located on Ortega Street is shown roughly here. It would have all of these perpendicular spaces, and one of the parking lot spaces would encroach on that. This is actually showing a 5-foot setback. The actual zoning ordinance is a 5-foot variable setback, but they comply with that on the Milpas frontage. But here, because of the parking proposed to be head-in off of Ortega Street, it necessitates that be modified. The applicant also prepared a parking study that showed that parking demand in this area for commercial uses, such as those that are proposed at this property, are lower than what is typically required in our zoning ordinance. They did a survey of 7 different properties on Milpas Street and found that all of them used, in effect, far less than one parking space per 250 square feet. And so they're proposing to park the commercial component at 1 per 333 square feet. The residential component is in compliance with the average unit density incentive program requirement of 1 parking space per residential unit. There's 73 residential units proposed and 73 residential parking spaces. So the difference is just in the commercial requirement, which is 21 parking spaces instead of 27 required.
What's your recommendation?
Oh, sorry. Staff's recommendation is to approve the requested modifications subject to conditions that the commercial parking be made available to any user outside of business hours. Oh, yes, and that in more intense uses than those proposed for these 2 retail components would require consultation with the Community Development Director.
Okay, great, thank you. Would you like to state your name for the record and provide additional comments?
Sure. My name is Lisa Plowman with RRM Design Group, and we have Scott SHO.
Scott SHO with Associated Transportation Engineers.
Right. So I just wanted to, I'm sure you've read the staff report, but just describe the project a little bit and sort of how this design came about and how we approached the city about what might be possible over on Ortega Street. So when we were originally looking at doing the design for the site, we were considering, how much retail should be on the site, how much residential can be on the site, and trying to figure out how we were going to park it without doing a podium parking because that drives a full 4th floor. So when we were analyzing it, we realized, okay, we can probably get about 73 units, which is only 47 units per acre, which is significantly less than what's allowed on the property, which is 63 units per acre. And the units are only about 700 square feet average, and they can be up to, I think, 930. So when we analyzed it, we had this vision like, okay, we want to do something for this block. We don't want to have a full 4th story. We want to be able to park it without a podium. And we think there's an opportunity here to do something with Ortega Street. And we want to analyze what the actual real commercial parking rates would be. So we originally started this process by sitting down with transportation staff and suggesting to them, we think actually that the 250, 1 space per 250 square feet parking requirement on Milpas is probably a little more than is required by the businesses there. I mean, the downtown parking requirement is 1 per 500. I mean, you do have parking structures that accommodate some of that. But we spoke to them and said, would you guys be open to having us do an analysis of what the demand is identifying some of the businesses and producing a report? And they said, sure. And so we had ATE embark on that process. And Scott, do you want to just describe sort of what you guys did?
I think Mr. Berman kind of hit it when he gave his staff report. We looked at both the site, the Capital Hardware, as well as 7 other sites along the Milpas corridor, from the paint store to the liquor store, thrift store, all kinds of different retail. And we found that both the existing site as well as the other similar sites along Milpas had quite a bit lower parking demands than the code requirement.
Can you get closer to the...
Is that a little better?
Yeah.
I've got a cold, so I'm not
No, that's
projecting well today. So we provided that information to staff, and they felt comfortable not using the rate of 2.5 per thousand. That's kind of how I look at it, but going up to 3 per thousand for the site, based on not only our survey information but additional data from the IT report. And that was the finding, and that's what led us here.
So that's a little bit higher than what the actual demand was that we found.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, I do have a question, or do you want to finish your presentation?
Is it about the
report? Yeah.
about the report? Go ahead and ask it, and then I'll go on about what
Okay.
Ortega.
Well, the parking modification is for the whole site. And so my question is why the parking study didn't look at the whole site in terms of demand. Is the demand for the residential uses going to be met on site?
My understanding is the request is for a modification for the commercial only, and that the demand for the code requirement for the residential is provided and met.
And
The notice says with the parking modification to provide 94 parking spaces out of the required 100 parking spaces. So it's a reduction of the required parking spaces for the site.
well, that we didn't propose it that way. What we submitted was providing the required parking for residential, which will be designated as residential parking. So we meet the AUD ordinance requirements. We specifically focused on the commercial demand, and we sought a modification to reduce the commercial parking requirements.
For modification purposes, the modification is with the land, was with the property, was with the development. So the modification is for the development. It's not for, we don't break out individual components and just look at that in terms of a parking modification request.
I could actually do that. Am I on? Am I on? I could just do this one then.
Can you state your name for record, although I know you are?
Hi, my name is Rob Dayton. I'm the principal transportation planner, and I completely see your point, and transportation wrestled with this one as well. The demand for the AUD does not meet demand, and as we've said as staff before council, that when council chose 1 space per unit, that they weren't meeting the demand that's required of the units on site. This would be no different for this site. The challenge is that the time when the parking demand is not met is significantly different for the housing versus the commercial. When the time which the demand won't be met for the AUD portion will be in the evening. It will be met all day long. So the request for the modification for the commercial is a daytime demand issue. So the commercial, even with the reduced parking, it will meet demand all day long. So if you were to approve the modification or not, the demand will still be exceeded for the AUD portion in the evening. But the modification that you're considering today will make no difference whether or not you choose to receive it. They'll still have a demand issue in the evening because the AUD is the one that drives that issue based on council's decision to only provide 1 space per unit and no guests. The commercial portion, however, does also help meet that demand in the evening. In other words, the commercial spaces that are being provided will help that in the evening and will alleviate that should residents own more than 1 vehicle per unit. But the commercial portion, the modification that's being requested is a daytime parking issue, and transportation supports it, as did the Planning Commission, because the daytime is when it would be affected, and it doesn't make any difference. So if you approve the modification for the commercial or for the total site, the demand during the day will be met.
Okay, that's just a different way than what we typically do for modifications, but I'll let you finish.
Okay. Okay. So the other item that I wanted to talk a little bit about that also relates to one of the modifications that we're requesting has to do with Ortega Street. So when we originally were contemplating the project, we also talked to transportation staff about what might be possible on Ortega Street. And we thought there was an opportunity to improve this area. It's a dead-end street now and sort of a little bit of a no man's land down. There's a lot of activity, but it's not that well developed. The parking isn't that well signed. It's not striped. I mean, so things sort of a little bit haphazard down there now.
Yeah, this is the street.
Yeah, that's the street, right. So, yeah, in some cases, people are parking head in. Some cases, people are parking parallel. And we saw this as an opportunity as a way to improve that section of Ortega, as well as still be able to provide, a significant amount of commercial parking, which doesn't exist today on the property, which serves the actual commercial retail spaces that would be developed with the project, as well as providing some additional head-in parking in a more organized fashion on the south side of Ortega Street, believing that this really will improve the conditions there now. One of the questions that has come up was, why are we seeking this modification to the setback? And so we thought this is the perfect location really to serve the retail, right? So people can come right in, they can step out, they can go to their retail uses. This is the other commercial parking over here.
Although it says residential?
No, that's just the number.
R1?
Oh, this is an old site plan. This is going to be commercial spaces here, and this is going to be commercial here. When we changed that when we went to the Planning Commission. So that stuff will be modified before we go to the ABR, but we will have 13 spaces here, and these will be commercial spaces over here. We felt that better suited the retail spaces here, so that people could pull in here, come to the business that they want to patronize, or they can come here and patronize here. We thought this, when we looked at it again, we thought this was a little bit far from the commercial services. So we felt that this was a really great opportunity, but we thought, okay, what is the actual objective of the setback? It's really to set the building back from the street. And if we push the parking all the way in, what that does is kind of squeezes the site. You might lose units, or you might push more units up to the fourth floor. And we thought that didn't really achieve that much. All you are asking for is to have the end of a car maybe project into the setback to some 5 feet, rather than if we pushed it in, we would have I think they're 23 feet long parking stalls. And we just didn't think that actually achieved very much. In addition, with the design that we have now, we actually are improving the conditions out there for vehicles and trucks to enter. Right now what you have is a 36-foot wide road, and you have 8 feet of parking on either side, definitely at the entrance. Down here we've got some red curb because people are parking head in there. And what we will be proposing, this is actually going to be widened when we get back to ABR to 30 feet because of some of the questions about trucks coming in and out. But what we will have is, instead of 36 with 2 8-foot parking lanes on either side, which leaves a 20-foot drive aisle, we will actually have a 30-foot drive aisle from the back of parking to the back of parking here. So that will make it basically the drive aisle 10 feet wider than it currently is.
Now this with the visibility triangle makes it look like it's like a driveway entrance instead, but it's really, is it going to be looking more like a street, or is it still going to be more looking like a parking lot?
That's a good question. This is something we worked with transportation staff on, and one of the suggestions was to actually make it look more like a parking lot than a street. and that this would be an apron, and actually this apron will be 30 feet as it comes in, but it would be an apron like you were approaching into a parking lot. But we would still, and I know one of the questions that's out there is this would still be signed as Ortega Street. It's still public right-of-way, and the city staff didn't think it was advisable. There was some discussion about whether we should divide the right-of-way up and give it to the property owners on either side, but you just don't know what's going to happen in the future, and the city probably doesn't want to give up right-of-way at this point in time, but it's not functioning at its maximum potential the way it is designed now. And what we're doing here now is we will have 13 commercial parking spaces on this side of the street, and we will have 11 commercial spaces on this side of the street. So really we're adding quite a bit of parking to Ortega right now, depending on who you ask and who's doing the measurements, anywhere from like 8 to 12 spaces that serve all of these businesses now. And what you're going to have is 24 spaces in the end serving businesses here and businesses over here. These actually will serve these businesses, but these will all be able to serve those businesses. And right now they're sharing that parking with people who are using Capital Hardware and potentially the lighting store, although they may park down here. One of the other things I wanted to address, and we are going to be meeting with the neighbors tomorrow morning to talk to them about just trucks coming in and out and what's going to happen during construction, because we understand their anxiety about that. This is a primary access for these businesses right here. And so during construction, the site will probably be fenced, and we have plenty of space to be able to stage the construction of the project on the site. So we won't need to be using Ortega Street. There will be so we understand that's got to remain open for them during the construction of the project. There will be some periods of time where there might be some work on Ortega Street that would have to be done, and we would have to time that with the neighbors, find out when they're getting their deliveries, figure out when we can do the improvements. At some point, we're going to have to repave that area, and it will be closed temporarily, and we would do that as quickly as possible. But I suggest that and maybe even add a condition to the project where we have a construction management plan that talks about how we will be dealing with the construction and the improvements to Ortega Street and the coordination with the neighbors. The other thing we're going to be showing them is we've run all of the turning templates for a variety of trucks that service them. Mm-hmm. So we've run templates for 30-foot trucks, 40-foot trucks, and 50-foot trucks. And Scott, you can talk a little bit about that if you want, but basically it shows that with a couple of, we are going to be making some minor design modifications to the site, to the parking islands to address that. You see 2 islands right now because we wanted to put some landscaping in, but after we ran the templates, we realized once we go back to ABR that we're going to shorten up those islands to 3 feet, and we took this one off just to make sure that those trucks can get in and out without any problem. We also can reduce the width of those parking stalls if necessary. They're at 9 feet now. They can go down to 8.5 to create even more room for them. Scott, do you want to say anything about that?
This is a diagram of the larger 50-foot truck making the turn. That was we looked at that in response to some of the issues that were raised at Planning Commission about the design of the on-street parking and the islands. So we wanted to make sure that the largest truck would fit through there. And so when we provided that to RRM, they adjusted the layout of the parking to make sure that would work.
Okay.
I think that's it. Oh, I did want to note there was one thing I noticed in the staff report. We are meeting all the bike parking requirements. The bike parking for the AUD, which is not part of your decision, but there are 73 spaces for that in that room right there, and there are 4 commercial bike spaces up here.
I think the staff report said there's a total of 77.
Yes.
Yeah, 77
Yep.
bicycle spaces.
Yep. And then there was some question about what's going to be going on in this residential amenities room. We haven't nailed it down 100%, but it's either going to be some kind of athletic facility, with some workout equipment, or it'll be a meeting room that'll allow people to have a party or something like that, because the units aren't particularly large. so that they might be able to have, I think it's about a little over 500 square feet in there. So it could be like a small community room.
Okay, so it's not like off-site meetings, which would drive
No.
more parking?
No,
for
it's
these?
purely for the residents.
Okay. I do have a number of questions, but I wonder if I should open the public hearing first. I think I will open the public hearing first and then ask my questions. Would like to note that I received 2 letters from the Ortega Street neighbors that I've read, as well as a letter from Chaz Sportswear. And then the one we just received today from Ralph, it's my understanding he's going to cover it in the hearing. So, the first public speaker is Ralph Lucart. If you'd like to come up, and we need a chair. Kathy, here, Andrew got one. Thanks.
Oh,
Yeah, you get us down.
makes more sense.
Yeah,
Yeah, there was a lot of stooping.
yeah.
Not do that much anymore. Right, well, I am Ralph Lucart,
And you have 2 minutes.
and I represent Marcy Lucart, the owner of Monarch Office Services at 631 Milpa Street. The subject is Ortega Street parking, especially what's referred to here as South Side. The present situation, we have 7 businesses, of which 5 cater to public on a daily basis. Monarch Office Services alone can have up to 3 clients present and has between 4 to 6 persons employed at any given time. Employees are presently encouraged to carpool, and several do so. Even at that, adequate parking for workers and clients for that business alone would be 6 spaces. We, together with the beauty salon, T-shirt printing business, kitchen business, flooring business, and Mr. Scott's cabinet business, are barely managing the dynamics of ever-changing parking availability. We just manage because of the 8 presently unrestricted spaces available on that little spur of Ortega that the development of this project developers plan to modify. The architects have drawn 10 perpendicular parking spaces plus an additional one that's for handicapped on the east or south side of Ortega, and to the casual observer it might appear to have mitigated the parking concern except for 2 inescapable facts. The assumption that every resident of each new unit will honor a limit of 1 car or truck per 2 to 4 person household is naive. Competition for those proposed south side of Ortega perpendicular parking spaces will certainly be skewed in favor of the residents of this new housing project because they could park their extra vehicles before business hours and effectively leave them there indefinitely. It's easy to game this system. We request that this board put stipulations in place to mitigate that possibility. Perhaps a 90-minute parking limit would suffice. There's already such a restriction in place on Milpas, and it is presently being enforced. So I would surmise it would require little effort to enforce. Perhaps some placards might be issued to the existing businesses allowing a few employees to park in these spaces during business hours. Item 2, half of the proposed perpendicular parking spaces on the south side of Ortega Street are drawn into what is now a red painted curb. Perhaps the developers have already gained permission to change that zone. Perhaps the developers are unaware of the red zone. Perhaps they are hoping we won't notice. But my request is this board requires some assurance that these spaces will actually materialize free of red zone restrictions before approving this project. And finally, personally, I think that after the dust dies down and the chaos of construction has ceased, this project will be an asset to Milpa Street and hopefully a home for some of the fine citizens who work in this extraordinary city. I seek only to ensure that the unavoidable impact that a project of this magnitude will have on this fragile community will be managed in a way that gives the existing businesses the greatest chance of survival.
Great, thank you. The next speaker is Don Scott, followed by Natasha Tordick, I think. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Don Scott. I'm the owner of the property immediately across the street, or the larger of the two properties across the street. I had wanted to, in my letter, I tried to address the issue of the traffic safety and ingress and egress from Ortega onto Milpas, but that may not be an issue that you are hearing here today. If it is not,
It's not.
we would love to know who do we talk to about that.
That's a good point. That my purview today is the requested parking modification to not provide all the parking spaces that's required by the zoning ordinance, and also the front setback modification. The street improvements that are in my purview relate to this project site. In terms of the public right-of-way area, that would be the design board that is going to be reviewing the whole of the project.
Is this in the future
Yes.
Yes.
that we have another opportunity to address these issues?
Yes. That will be when it returns to the design review board, or depending the outcome of the hearing today.
Right.
If it's before the planning commission, they did give comments on it.
Yeah.
And I don't have purview over the AUD part of it. They may decide to provide additional comments to the design board.
Right.
But so in some cases, your comments regarding the right-of-way does impact the issues associated with the modification.
Right.
But in terms of the turning radius, that's a total valid point, and I
Yeah.
understand that. But that's more to be something to
Yeah.
address with.
I'm more concerned. I'm fairly well settled that the turning trucks will be able to get in and out, especially if this hardscape is pulled back.
Okay.
I'm more concerned that right now we can't get out onto Milpas Street from Ortega during high traffic hours because with a single striping of Milpas, traffic really backs up, and this is not going to get better with this project. So I won't deal with that because that's not your issue. I would like to ask how the new commercial spaces on Capitol Hardware's side of the street, and I totally support Ralph, and we would love to have some kind of a placard or neighborhood parking permit, something like that would allow us to maintain what we have in the way of extra parking today. But what are the restrictions on those commercial parking spaces across are those open to us as well? Are they open to the public generally? Are they restricted to Capitol Hardware only?
So you're talking about the private property parking?
The private property parking on that side of the street. I'd like to hear that addressed.
Okay.
And that's
all your comments?
enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. So the next speaker is Natasha Torrido. I can't read if that's an A or a D. Followed by Natalia.
That's Todorovic.
Todorovic?
Natasha Todorovic.
Okay.
I understand what you guys are talking about in terms of the parking, and the problem here is with the project is this block thinking. We think of these things in terms of these narrow little spaces, and so we organize that way. And the problem with the project is we're not taking into consideration the larger infrastructure. And if I was to pour this over here, you'd have water all over the place, right? And we're not taking account the fluidity. The fluidity meaning the electrical infrastructure. And Edison already says that the electrical will not support the current community as it is. It was not built for the businesses that exist there right now. Second part of it is water. We already are being asked to restrict our water consumption. And what we're doing here with this AUD is we are increasing the number of people that are going to draw from our water supplies. We've also got gas, and we have a city that already cannot fix sidewalks, can't fix roads. And here we are with this AUD, with these giant projects that are already in a strained infrastructure, going to cause chaos. So I think we need to think of it in a much larger way, in a much larger approach. We can't think of these little blocks because we're going to work ourselves into a problem, like at the harbor. And we said, oh, let's see, we want to build a harbor, and who cares that the sand comes in? Well, guess what? Now the city has to spend millions of dollars every year cleaning out sand. So we have to think of these things as a larger community, repercussions into the future, and the drain on our natural resources. Thank you.
Sure. And the last speaker is Natalia Govani. Govani. Sorry.
Good morning. Good morning. As a business owner on Milpas Street, we already suffer from serious traffic congestion, overcrowdedness, and a poorly structured infrastructure. And this project would only intensify these problems. Furthermore, we are in a drought, and the city is constantly reminding us to conserve water. But why should we pay attention and or care if the rules are different for Mr. Bleeker? This is a total contradiction in and of itself. So I urge you today to please reconsider your decision on this matter. Allowing such a monstrosity will ruin the charm and attractiveness that makes Santa Barbara so unique. Thank you.
Great, thank you. That was my last public speaker slip. Did anybody else want to submit a slip? No, seeing no one. Are those the only public comment letters that we received?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll close the public hearing. I would like to just quickly address the drought issue. We realize it's a major issue for the community. The city council has been reviewing that as recently as yesterday, and they've talked about development restrictions, and at this time they decided not to go forward with it. So that is a larger issue. It's a major issue for the community, and I would encourage you to speak to the city council in terms of development restrictions. But at this time, there's no development restrictions that would prohibit this project from going forward in terms of water. So in terms of the comments that I heard at the public hearing, or during the public hearing, I was just wondering, Rob or Chelsea, if one of you can just briefly explain what you look at with the construction management strategies. I know we have those quite often. People ask to do construction on property. It affects the public right-of-way. We issue permits. What do we look at, and what kinds of things are currently a requirement to not affect neighbor businesses? If one of you two want to.
Sure. Chelsea.
Move the thing towards you.
Hopefully this is on.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I think. Chelsea Swanson with Transportation Planning. We typically restrict use of the right-of-way for construction staging or storage of vehicles, or use if the developers want to use the right-of-way, they would have to come into the city, to the Public Works counter, ask for permission, have conditions on their permits if they were to be granted. We'd also want to minimize any impacts to the neighbors when work does have to be done on Ortega Street. And I briefly talked to our traffic engineer about this, and he was recommending some phasing, somehow to phase it so that access is always available to the maximum extent possible to the neighbors. You could also look at time of day. So I think there's flexibility in how, at least use of the right-of-way in particular is going to be granted. But bottom line is that there needs to be permission to use it for construction purposes. Even for construction parking, it's not standard to just allow it on the street. So.
And it's pretty routine that you look at what uses occur on the public street, and like in the situation of Ortega, the only access to some of them is from Ortega Street, and so that's an important issue for.
It's usually land development engineering staff, and sometimes our traffic engineer that would look at the vehicular access, the pedestrian access, basically how to protect all access as much as possible. And so they'd have to be approving a plan for the use of the right-of-way.
Okay.
So,
All right.
yeah.
Great. Thank you. The other question, and I think it would still be transportation, or I know the applicant, the letters that were submitted, and then also the testimony today at the public hearing talks about limiting time limits on parking, and Milpas is time limited. Is it too early in the process, or have it already been discussed about having time limits on the Ortega Street property? And then the other thing I was wondering is, I know the time limits are on public property. We don't enforce on private property, but is there some way there can be time limits on the commercial portion? Because my concern is that, since it has been stated in a number of public hearings that the demand for the AUD units are not met, that the extra cars for the AUD will be parked in the commercial spaces, and there'll be none available for the purposes that it's meant for. So, so time limits both on and off the project site.
Okay, so starting with that last part, that last question on the AUD, what we would imagine, there's two types of parking for the commercial. There's one that appears more to be off-street in the back of the parcel, and then there's the commercial parking that appears to be more a part of the street on Ortega. So for the portion that's in the back, we would hope that the applicant would free those up and communicate to the residents they're allowed to park there in the evenings. For the on-street parking, I think what was expressed from people who are attending the meeting, that it is a real concern that AUD residents would be parking in the what is more the on-street portion of Ortega Street. And we want that to be available for customers of the businesses in the area. So signing that, as we do Milpas, for a 90-minute parking would be appropriate. The challenge of that is that if we do that, there would not be a permitting process available for employees, and that is actually the point, is that we don't want employees parking in the most convenient parking for those customers. The other thing in the conversation is we wrestled with where to put this parking that is being proposed by the applicant off of Ortega Street. Is yes, it's on their property, but it would be really, really great if it performed more like a public parking supply. In other words, there is nothing to restrict a Capital Hardware customer from parking on the other side of the street.
It's public parking.
Which is public parking. And we would also think it would work best for the operations of that parking if other businesses could also do the same. So, we would like to suggest that the best way is for the applicant at least to try initially to keep that parking available in a 90-minute fashion to all customers during the day, and then in the evening, obviously, it could be the whole parking area could be for AUD folks. And if you include the public parking on the other side of the street, that actually would be sufficient for the whole project. That's the way it would be best treated in our estimation.
Because I would be concerned if this isn't 90-minute parking, then that employees would come and park here, since it's not restricted. I mean, we have that around our building, that where it's not restricted, other areas they come in. So that would help in terms of having parking available for the businesses that are in the neighborhood to have that 90-minute.
That's correct. And I think one of the commenters even said that, they encourage their employees to use other forms of transportation, or if they do need to drive, that they would park a little bit more remote from the site. And that's a great strategy that we've implemented downtown and would do in this business district as well, is to reserve the parking for the customer who's going to drive the businesses and the revenue for businesses to sustain their operations. So that 90-minute parking is a great idea, and we would intend to do that.
Okay.
So can I speak to that just briefly? One thing I think it's important to point out is that some of that commercial parking is going to serve the employees, right? that are working in these retail businesses. So we would want to identify where those employees are going to park and maybe even designate some of it as staff parking or something like that, so that they're not parking over here, but they're parking someplace a little bit more remote.
Well, what you told me was that although this is labeled here, there's some over here which is totally on private property.
Yep.
Whereas this is utilizing, it's on private property. There's a portion in the, oh, no, it's all, I'm sorry, this is a setback line.
Yeah.
So it's all on the private property, but it's utilizing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think, and I just asked the applicant, they don't have a problem with working to see if this area could remain open and operate a little bit more like Rob was talking about, where people could come in and park, and maybe it's even signed with 90 minutes.
What I was suggesting is that it be signed equally on both sides, same.
They seem to be open to trying that and seeing how that works.
Okay.
Yeah. But we do have to reserve some spaces for staff, and I think that could happen over here.
Mm-hmm. Then the other thing was another comment regarding the red zone. There's an acknowledgement. We know it's a red zone. It will be removed. So for parking, it would be. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, and I think Capital Hardware has an interest in seeing these serve customers that are going in and out. They don't want employees parking there. They want it. Mm-hmm. They want to see those businesses getting their customers parking there and being able to come in and access them.
Okay, so in terms of traffic flow on site, it's two-way all the way around, right? It's not envisioned you come in one and go out. It's two-way all the way around.
Correct.
Okay, so in terms of parking lot, well, wait, I'm going to do another one. Okay, there's actually two. So one of the concerns, there's two competing interests. One of the concerns that was expressed by the neighbors, is more so in the letters than here, was the fact that these businesses, their only access is from Ortega Street. And by making this look more like a parking lot, it'd be harder to find them. People may go by, they may not feel like they should go down the street. And then, transportation suggesting that it should look more like a parking lot to invite people to come in and park. What's your response to that, one? And two, what do you think you could do to help facilitate these businesses not being lost, not being able to be found? Signage, have you thought about that kind of thing?
Yeah, I had some initial conversations with Dan Gullett from Transportation Planning, and we were thinking about that. Certainly, we don't want these businesses to suffer in any way from the improvements that would be made on Ortega Street. And Alan Bleeker and his partners are concerned about that. Mm-hmm. So we talked about how would you sign this area, and we think that we still need to maintain an Ortega Street sign for a variety of reasons. One, for fire access. The fire department needs to know that that this is Ortega Street and there's addresses off of it. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about doing some kind of signage. It's something we would have to work out with ABR and whatnot, but we don't have any objection to trying to facilitate some plan that makes the community feel more comfortable, the business community in the area, about not being lost down in this area. And I think as people get used to it, and the people that you currently patronize those businesses get used to it, I don't think it'll be a problem, but certainly at first there may be some questions about it. Mm-hmm. And so doing something to assist that, I don't think we have any problem with that. And I'm not really sure how we would sign it. I mean, you probably can't have a big sign in the right-of-way there. I don't know, does transportation staff have any
I don't see why we
suggestions?
couldn't put a sign in the right-of-way. It's just a matter of getting through sign committee and making it appropriate. But it is the intention to make it look more private. So a sign is expected in that situation, some sort of a banner sign that you would see that summarizes the businesses.
Not a banner sign.
Or, sorry.
Monument.
Monument, sorry. Yeah. Wrong term. Thank you, Ms. Reardon. Monument sign that would show the businesses and really display more than they have now. More advertisement from Milpas Street, which is really the idea. Milpas is the business pass-by factor that you want to capture. when we first heard this comment at Planning Commission, I would kind of wrestle with it a little bit there. Is, the pass-by factor you have now on Ortega Street is not, it's a dead-end street. So it's not really there. But maybe we could actually make it better for those businesses by having that monument sign in the public right-of-way at the head that shows that they're back there.
Well, yeah, because my concern is a person driving down the street, and if this looks like a driveway,
Yeah.
and I'm looking for Ortega, I don't know what these addresses are, so make it 100 Ortega, and I go by, it's like, oh, I'm going down here looking, and all there's a sign, I might not.
Right. And I think you could do some sort of low, monument sign that can be viewed from the street, but something like you would see almost in a shopping center, so that when people drive by, they know what businesses are in that center and that they can pull in. So we'd have the names of the businesses and their address beneath it, something like that.
Okay. All right. And so then the other question I have, which I think would be a combination of Rob and you, in terms of parking modifications, so your setback modification, when you scrape the site, you have a vacant site, you have no constraints. And so one of the first things we ask and look for is, what conforming options did you look at? And I know I've heard in past projects from transportation staff, they encourage buildings to be pushed towards the street to enhance the pedestrian atmosphere. And I realize that's what you've done on Milpas Street, and I realize Ortega Streets is a dead-end street. But what other options did you explore to not require the front setback modification?
Right. No, and I think you raise a good point. I mean, we're going to be starting from scratch in this area. And so when you're designing a project, and I'm not the designer, but so I'll speak for them, but when you're designing a project, you're balancing all of these objectives. One being, okay, what's the right mix of residential and commercial? That's one objective. How are we going to provide the parking to keep the cost down so we can build the rental housing? Because once you build podium parking, the cost per unit goes way up, and so you have to collect more rent to be able to pay that down. So you're figuring out how to do that. And one of the things we discovered in the AUD was charrette process was that on-grade parking was the best way to keep the price of the units and the rent rates affordable. So you look at those things. You look at, okay, what is your existing context? What are the heights of the buildings in the area? What could be tolerated by the community? And so when we looked at all that, we figured, okay, one of the options was to provide more of the residential development up on the fourth floor. Right now, we just have a little portion tucked in the back. That's one option. So you can sort of once you squeeze the building this way, it goes up this way. So when we analyzed it, we looked at all those potential factors and said, okay, and in fact, we actually ended up reducing our retail commercial because of some of these parking issues. But I think we figured that a full fourth story probably wasn't the right thing for this block of Milpas, particularly given that we have 1- and 2-story projects there, and that we thought that probably the ABR and we went to the Milpas Community Association, and everybody would be more supportive if it was just 3 stories. I mean, introducing 3 stories is even a change, right? And so this block of Milpas is in transition. So that was kind of the option we looked at. Either you would do podium parking or you would do this 4th story, both of which we didn't think were good necessarily for the community overall for the reasons I've described. And I can, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, that didn't really, okay. All right, that didn't really answer it, but.
Well, those are the options that we considered, which you said, what are your different design options? One is you put podium parking on, and so everything is contained on the site.
Well, I'm thinking, Rob, do you have any, did I summarize your views in that the reason why transportation staff is comfortable with allowing the back out of the street, which necessitates the parking spaces to be in the front setback instead of pushing the building out and tucking them in, is the reason because Ortega's not really a highly traveled street, and I'm just struggling with the front setback modification and what I've heard with other projects in terms of recommendations from staff.
Yeah, that's correct. And the real strategy to make this look more like a parking lot is a real benefit for Milpas Street and how it functions both for traffic at the intersection of Ortega and Milpas, which has traditionally been a hot spot for difficulty in getting pedestrians across the street. By having it be a driveway apron, now pedestrians don't cross the street. They have the red carpet treatment. It's really just a continuous sidewalk, and motorists are being more careful as they're entering. And all the signals, you don't need signage for that. All the signals are there. When you create an apron entrance, motorists treat that completely different than a street and drive at different speeds through there. So it's quite a benefit to have that. And then also just kind of dealing with Ortega Street and its dead-end nature, this really spruces it up, provides way more use of the street, provides a better business climate, because now it's really parking. It's really a strong parking area. So we felt all in all on balance that was the best way to do it. In combination with what other people are saying in the 90-minute parking and making sure it is a clientele customer service area.
Okay. Okay, then this is transportation staff too. So in the staff report, and like I just said, it does talk about the transportation staff's or public works staff's support of the proposed backing out on the public street. The question I have now is in regards to the other public improvements that we typically see in public streets, like sidewalks and that. And on this side, they're proposing, I don't have a public improvement plan, but I know there's an existing sidewalk here. Your existing, I don't know if you're going to improve it or what it comes to this side. Currently, right now, there is a sidewalk that comes to that first driveway entrance. And so there's no public sidewalk on this side of the street. I see that there is a sidewalk to get people to the business and I guess the bike space and this here, but it stops. It doesn't continue to the gate for the junior high. And I know junior high students, the high time that they probably use the gate is before school and after school because they can't leave campus at lunch. So that'd be different than the high school. But what about the sidewalk? Are we going to require it to be a public sidewalk? Do we want them to extend it to come down, or do we feel it's fine that we just direct? How is this going to work? Since they are proposing parking in where typically a sidewalk would be.
These are great questions and things that we really wrestle with. The gate is closed most of the time, and the reason for retaining the public nature of Ortega is exactly what Ms. Plowman said: is we don't know what the future is. Ortega does run through the junior high.
Is this a fire lane for the?
No?
It's emergency access.
It can function for that. The sidewalk on the private property will appear, look like, and function like a public sidewalk to everyone who comes. It'll look just like that. People will use it like that. In order to fence it off, would be very difficult to do that. So we're not concerned about it being closed to the public. And then when it gets to the driveway, with the point you pointed out, right to the back, right there. We wrestle with that. How do we put in a concrete sidewalk across there? Do we put in an apron? And we're dealing with some drainage areas there, but we feel like it's such a low use crossing that people won't have any problems with it. There won't be a major conflict or safety issue, and that the way it's designed is appropriate.
Okay. What's this loading here, Lisa?
That's temporary loading for trucks that come in and out on a daily basis, like you may have a FedEx or a UPS truck or something like that.
And how does that differ from? So this would be for residences. They pull here and do the residences, and this is more envisioned for the retail
That's
space?
what we're talking about. We're talking with transportation staff about that. We'd like to have something, which is pretty common all around the city, is to have some commercial loading and unloading on the street, because it would be ideal to be able to serve these retail businesses and not have to pull into this area and load or unload there. So so far it appears that there's support for that, and then this would operate more like for the residents, because people getting packages during the day or whatnot. Okay. Yeah, so they come in for a few minutes, deliver some packages, and then depart.
Okay, I think you've already said, so you are going to assign parking. It's not going to be a shared use, that there's going to be, the residential ones will be signed. Will they be unit counted? Will it say, like similar to this, I know this isn't, but like R44, so whoever has, well, that's handicap.
I know, right. It's challenging with handicap.
Parking working?
I think what we would do is sign it as residential and not sign it by unit. Just note that what are residential spaces and what are commercial spaces, and then let people use them. I mean, we don't, unless you were tracking exactly who was in every unit in terms of whether they had a disability or a handicap placard, that would be kind of challenging. So that is, I think that's what our approach will be, is just sign residential versus commercial. And then I think we'll have to let the tenants know, and I think it's an advantage to say in the evening hours, the commercial spaces that are on site are open for use. But when the businesses, I think it's 9 o'clock on the city streets, that's when the commercial business parking timing starts, and it ends at 6. And so they would observe those hours like any other commercial area.
Okay. I'm still just getting stuck on, the concern that was brought up by the public, and also a concern I have is just how to keep the residents from using the commercial spaces. I know, if we sign this for 90 minutes, that they're not going to be able to do that. But for here,
I think it's an enforcement. Yeah, it's enforcement for the businesses that are operating here, and they have a great interest in not having their residents park in those particular spaces because they're going to need them for their employees and for their patrons.
How does
they'll also know, because they're control of the whole operation, and because residents will have the same car, it's very easy to patrol that and to know who's in what. Even if they were parking in the customer parking out front, they'll know who it is. The guests, it'll be a little bit more iffy, but the ones in back will be signed, for the commercial use. And because employees are largely parking there, if they come in the morning and find a resident there, that's going to be a problem they're going to address right away. It's very self-policing, and staff won't need to be involved.
And usually when you have a lease, you get the information about the vehicle and the license plate, so you know what cars are associated with what unit, so you can track that.
Is there an on-site unit, a manager's unit?
There'll be a manager on the site, yeah.
Okay. And then, Rob, in terms of transportation, I know in project review, you guys typically don't like assigned parking. You want it open and shared for everybody of the sites. But in this situation, given that AUD is different than commercial, transportation staff wouldn't have a problem with requiring them being signed residential or commercial.
That's right. Yeah, we would, and they would be unit assigned for the AUD since it's only one per. And then in the case, which there will be a good percentage of these who will not have a vehicle, then the management can also, if someone has two, what we would recommend is selling those spaces or renting those extra spaces so that there's incentive not to do it. But that would be also available. And then signing the commercial parking for the day is also appropriate, and then leaving it open for the evening is also appropriate.
Okay. All right, so I think those are all my questions. So in regards to the parking modification, like I said, when we do parking studies, we don't separate out uses. We look at the demand of the entire site. This project is more complicated because there's a lot of city goals and policies that it's implementing. Rental housing is really important, and providing residential housing is good. The one thing that I like about the project is the units you're proposing, they're not huge. They average 700 square feet, and I know quite a few of the projects that the design boards have looked at, they're more like 1,200, 1,300 square feet, and they have one parking space, whereas this one, it is one, or they're smaller. The breakdown is, I forget, there's a lot of one bedrooms.
Yeah, there's 32.
32 one bedrooms. And then how many two bedrooms?
There are
about that same?
41.
41 two bedrooms and 32. So, the unit size is smaller.
They're even quite small two bedrooms. I mean, that's small.
Is there a different parking demand for different size units? At one time, I thought transportation staff was saying under 750 square feet, you're comfortable with one.
It's really hard to say what will be the actual use. There's a lot of influences that go into whether it will or will not meet demand. If you looked at it based on our past practices, we generally would be asking about 1.5 spaces per unit in this case. But then if you look at the actual car ownership from the census data, 60% of residential units in this type of area have 0 or only 1 car. So it really is going to be dependent upon the person who comes here, how it's advertised, what is the management's perspective on owning more than 1 car, do they frown upon it, are they going to be sticklers about, hey, being really upfront, hey, if you're a 2-car person, this might not be the right place for you. The project is positioned strategically that even if someone is traditionally used to having 2 cars, when you move to this type of area, you find that if you can not have a second automobile, that you can save about $5,000 to go to other things that you want to spend money on. It's very walkable, even to the down, extremely bikeable to the downtown. So, and for incidental uses, it's perfect. So it will really be dependent upon, and we don't have a lot of these AUD projects on the ground to really measure. The other thing we're combating is that they're going to be the nicest, lower cost rental units, and how will that drive car ownership? So we don't have a lot of answers for you, but we've positioned it to the best we can to make it so that it will probably be a lot less than we've commonly required in the past. We just can't guarantee it'll meet demand.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll skip over to the front setback yard mod. In terms of the front setback modification, I understand your design philosophy. I understand transportation supportability of it. The way it functions, Ortega Street's going to function, and the way it functions now, it's more of, it really is a dead-end street. And there might be people that come here and turn around and go in, but in terms of its use, it's more of a low volume street. So, in providing the parking parallel in this front setback that mirrors the opposite side, that is supportable, and you are providing the amenities in terms of a sidewalk. There's a drainage plan. There's a storm drain that goes down here, so the drainage would be caught. So I could support the front setback modification. The parking modification I really am struggling with, but I think I could get there with the additional conditions that that all the parking, public and private, on Ortega Street be signed 90 minutes, and it could have the same hour limitation as on Milpas Street, but that both on street and on the private property is signed for 90 minutes and it's enforced. And then in terms of the commercial here, that the areas of the parking, wherever you decide, and I think I agree it's better to have the commercial up in this area, closer to the retail, that it be signed too for commercial use. And then if transportation staff, the rest can be signed residential, and if transportation staff wants it to be numbered, well then they can they'll require that during the plan check. But at a minimum, I want it to be, these are commercial parking spaces and these are residence parking spaces. And I didn't count your total number of spaces that you're showing here, but I don't know that it meets, because there's 73, this goes up to R73 and this goes down up to C19. So it appears that it's missing 2 spaces, but I didn't go and count them all, but
We have. I'm sorry. We have counted them, and
Okay.
they are there. I mean, they have to be there before we get ABR approval.
right,
Yes.
yeah, so just verify before
Yeah.
you go back to ABR. The other condition that I would want to add is that that signage we talked about on Milpas Street, whether it's in the right-of-way or if it ends up being shared with the parking or with the bicycle here, just somewhere on the corner of Ortega and Milpas Street, signage to, like a directory or something to let the public know about the businesses here. And that could be, it's something that ABR, you work with ABR on terms of that. So ABR, look at the signage on Ortega Street. I just want to make sure that I add all the conditions that I talked about. Did you write any notes for any other? Did I get them all?
Do you want them just to look at signage on Ortega Street, or make any recommendations about the aesthetics of the street, the extent to which it looks like a road or a parking lot?
I would like to ask them to encourage them to make the entrance look as road-like, but I think with the signage, that if they decide to make it look like a parking lot, it's kind of awkward because I have this side and they have that side. Mm-hmm. So, I think with the signage, and you're going to go to the design board, you can reflect that in terms of comments that to make this look and feel as inviting as possible.
Seems to me like something kind of over in this area would be somewhere on one of these two.
Yeah, I don't want to dictate where the sign goes because that's going to be design review and transportation staff, because they're not going to want a sign to be located where it goes in the site visibility. So I just want a sign somewhere up here in this corner or up at this intersection. And I think you understand that. So it's just the 3, the time limit on both sides of Ortega Street. And then signage for Ortega Street for the businesses and assigned residential on-site, residential and commercial parking. And then and with the 2 that are already proposed here, that you're limited due to the fact that you're asking for a parking modification, that you'll have to come back here.
Yeah, I think we can find those conditions acceptable.
Okay.
And you said that the public and private parking on Ortega Street should be signed for
90 minutes.
And enforced.
Yes.
Now, for the public parking...
We enforce it, but I want them to enforce it on...
Thank you.
Because if the police come down, they may not know that it is.
They're probably not going to know. Exactly.
Have them do that.
Yeah, but I want it signed and enforced, So with those added conditions and the conditions that are here, I can approve the project. My action is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 calendar days. They also have a oversight authority of all my actions, and if they felt this warranted additional discussion before them, they could call it up during that same 10-day review period, and if that was to occur, Andrew would contact you. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, the next project is 329 East Cannon Perdido Street. Shoe. Shoe.
Still here?
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay.
One of these is for you, and one of them must be for me.
Oh, I received one, right? I received this. That's this one. That. Can you guys carry your conversation outside, please? Lisa. Can you guys carry your conversation outside?
Oh, yeah.
Anytime you're ready, Joanne. I think we could turn this page. This isn't that.
Okay, this is 329 East Canyon Perdido Street, and the property is zoned C2, and it's a 2,468 square foot lot. This is the current development on site consists of a 683 square foot single family residence, 1 story, and an as-built shed. This is the property outline right here, and this is the rear end. The proposed project involves demolition of the existing structures on site, and if we turn to the next page, it includes construction of a new 3-story, 1,418 square foot single-family dwelling with a 161 square foot cellar and a 668 square foot garage, a new roof deck, an exterior staircase, an entry portico, new walls and stairs, and associated grading. The proposed total of 2,086 square feet is 95% of the guideline floor-to-lot area ratio. The proposal will address violations outlined in a zoning information report and in an enforcement case. The requests before you today are for a front setback modification to allow the garage to encroach into the required 20-foot front setback for parking that backs out into a public street, and to allow the stairs and the steps in the dwelling to encroach into the required 15-foot setback for 3-story buildings. An interior setback to allow the new garage, exterior stairway, roof deck, and dwelling to be located in the 10-foot interior setback to the east, and an interior setback to allow the new dwelling and balcony and steps to be located in the required interior setback to the west for the portico, and a rear setback modification to allow the exterior stairway to be located in the required 6-foot setback on the ground floor portions, and then to allow the stairway, roof deck, and dwelling in the required 10-foot setback, rear setback for 2nd and 3rd story portions. So the proposed project involves, like you said, the demolition of the existing structures on site and construction of the new 3-story dwelling with the parking. Staff generally discourages once property is the structures on site and it becomes vacant. We generally discourage modifications. However, in this case, staff recognizes the small size of the lot, the 32-foot width at the front, and the grade differential from the street present site constraints that qualify this project for some relief of the development standards. So in regard to the front setback modification, the garage is proposed to be located 5 feet from the front property line instead of the 20-foot required. And the dwelling and the steps are located 10 feet from the property line instead of the 15-foot required for 3-story buildings. Staff supports the front setback modifications because the proposed garage would allow for conforming parking on site and without the need for excessive grading. The proposed garage will meet transportation staff's requirements. The modification is necessary due to the grade difference from the street, and it's consistent with the pattern of development in the neighborhood. Staff also supports the front setback modification for the stairs and dwellings as they're consistent with the pattern of development in the neighborhood, and the lot is site constrained due to its size and configuration. The existing dwelling is now located approximately 1 foot from this property line, and so the proposal is to locate the garage on the property line instead of the 6 feet required. And the proposed roof deck is located approximately 1 foot from the interior property line, and the dwelling and rear stairway are located on the interior property line instead of the 10 feet required. The property next door has a 0 lot line. Staff originally didn't recommend approval of this, but in going to the site, if you see the 1 foot that's there now, it's an area for garbage and things to accumulate, which would be difficult to clean out over there. So staff, after visiting the site, found that they would support the setback requirement for the garage and dwelling because they'll face the wall of the adjacent neighbor's dwelling, which doesn't have any windows or openings in that area, and it's not anticipated to adversely impact the adjacent neighbor. The proposal is consistent with the pattern of development in the neighborhood, and the lot is site constrained due to its size and configuration. However, staff doesn't support the request for the exterior stairway, the new bedroom doors, and then if you go up the second level, there is the stairway leads to a door to this bathroom, so we don't support that as well, or the location of the roof deck in close proximity to the property line. So the next modification is the west interior setback modification, and the existing dwelling now is located about 4 feet from the interior property line, and the proposed development, the dwelling would be approximately 6 feet from the property line. The portico would be approximately 4 inches from the interior property line, and there's a proposed balcony on this side that would be about 4.5 feet from the property line. Instead of the 10 feet required. Staff supports the west interior setback modification for the dwelling because the setback is greater than what currently exists. It's consistent with the pattern of development in the area and is not anticipated to adversely impact the adjacent neighbor. However, staff does not support the entry portico or the balcony in this location because of its proximity to the adjacent neighbors, and it could adversely impact them. Regarding the rear setback modification, the proposed stairway is located on the rear property line because that is right here. And instead of the 6 feet required for ground floor portions, however, it goes up to the 3rd floor. And there's also in the rear setback, the proposed dwelling and roof deck are located approximately 6 feet from the rear property line instead of the 10 feet required for 2nd and 3rd story portions. Staff supports the rear setback modification for the dwelling because of the site constraints associated with this lot. It would be difficult to do something in this location and to provide a usable floor area for the dwelling, but we do not support the elements for the exterior stairway, the roof deck, the new bedroom doors, and new bathroom doors in the rear setback because with the demolition of the existing development, something appears that it could have been constructed that would have been further away from the house, or it could be eliminated and still have a usable space and dwelling and with outdoor area. Transportation staff has reviewed the project and can support the garage location. However, they have requested that the site visibility triangle for the driveway meet their requirements and that A public works permit shall be obtained for the driveway apron, the utility box relocation, and the ADA compliant sidewalk. Therefore, staff has added conditions to that effect. The project is located within archaeological sensitivity areas. An archaeological letter report for the project determined that it was unlikely that artifacts would be encountered during the proposed constructions, but recommends the standard unanticipated archaeological discovery condition be included, and therefore a condition has been included to that effect. The project was reviewed by the Historic Landmarks Commission and was forwarded to the staff hearing officer with comments. Staff recommends partial approval of the project with the conditions and findings outlined in the staff report. So staff recommends approval of the front setback modifications, approval of the east interior setback modification except for the roof deck, the bedroom doors, the bathroom door, and exterior stairway, approval of the west interior setback modification except for the entry portico and balcony, approval of the rear setback modification except for the roof deck, bedroom doors, bathroom doors, and exterior stairway. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Okay, great, thank you.
We did receive one letter today, so I'm giving the applicant a copy of it, and you have a copy as well.
Okay, great. If you'd like to state your name for the record and provide additional comments.
Sure. Jarrett Gorin from Vanguard Planning.
John Beach, architect.
Okay, so I'm going to go through and basically want to start with the neighborhood context and then walk you through some of the foundational elements of the design and what drives the design here, and then touch on some of the modifications that staff supports. And then we'll wind up with the places where we disagree with staff on modifications, and just try to keep this organized since there's so much material here to cover, and we'll try to cover it as quickly as I can. So to begin with, I want to start with the picture of the neighborhood here, and this is the 300 block of East Cannon Perdido Street. So that's Laguna Street there, and that's Garden, and this is our property right here. And then this is the house next door to us, right in here. Yeah, I think.
This is our side,
Yeah.
that little guy. That's the neighbor.
And what you can basically see immediately in this photo is we've got a very high density neighborhood. Nearly every property, certainly right in this cluster on our block, almost every property is built out to 0 lot lines on at least 2 of their property lines, some on 3 of their property lines, some on all 4 of their property lines. But even on the surrounding blocks, lots of the properties are built out to the property lines, and it's a transitional neighborhood. There's a lot of mix of commercial and residential in this as it transitions from more residential this way up into the downtown core as you go up this way here. And it's also a really unique block in that this is where the street was cut in to a hillside, and so all of these properties sit up about 10 feet to 12 feet above the street. This is a really enlarged blow up from Google Earth.
This is our house.
So it looks a little bit like a abstract painting, but it is a photograph. And this is the existing roof of the house. This is the house that's next to us. This is what is referred to as the central courtyard of the house next to us. And this is actually... Well, that's an outdoor ground floor living space, and then this is a courtyard. And it's actually covered over. It's more of a solarium, atrium. So this is not open to the sky on that house next to us, and that's going to be critical when we start talking about some of these modifications later as to our roof deck that we'll be talking about. So just pay attention to that. And the other thing that you can see real clearly in this photo is roof decks are very common features here. We've got one right here. This property here has got a roof deck right up against the property line, and we got another roof deck right next door to us. The city approved this property with its roof deck and with an exterior staircase right against the property line and in the setback as well, and granted modifications for that. the exact same modifications that we're requesting here on a very similar property.
In what year?
Next door. That would have been 1987 or 88, I believe. So.
And I think if we can.
You need to talk into the mic and turn it on.
Sorry. And if we can just, Jared, maybe outline the property as this shape.
Yeah, well, I'll get into that in a little bit. I'll get into that when we get to our site plan. So, anyway, that's what these aerials look like. And then just to take a quick walk around. Have you been out to the neighborhood? I'll just do it for the benefit of the hearing, so it's in the record. Where's the photo? Here we go. Just some quick neighborhood context, and I'll put this up as a reference. So, right here on the corner is this, at the corner of Cannon Perdido and Laguna Street. And then as you come up the street here, right on this frontage here, this is our property here with the existing house, which is dilapidated and needs to be torn down. That's what the zoning violation is that got mentioned earlier. It's a tear down order, basically. This is the house next door, which is, they did a beautiful job making it look really old, but it is from the late 1980s. And then this is actually the owner's house. The applicant of this project is who lives next door to this project and would be impacted by this project. And then just right up the street here, this building.
Is this one unit or is this multiple units?
That's one unit.
Single family?
We have this commercial building, which comes right up against the street with its driveway entrance. That's this building right here. This is the El Caserío project that comes up in there.
Just to let you know, in terms of the concerns I have, I don't have really concerns about the front setback.
Okay.
So if that would speed up the presentation part.
I'll just show these pictures real quick. That's across the street from us.
I agree that the neighborhood is, all built up to the front property line.
That's the neighborhood.
Yeah, the question would be more, a lot of times when people request modifications with the front setback or even interior setback, we look at what the request is for. So like in your case, it's a garage, and typically then if you're asking for a relief of something, we limit it to be the minimum requirement, so 20 by 20, and I noticed you have a 24 by 24. So one of the questions would be, could it be altered some way to make it reduced? So, in that instance, it might be germane to the conversation. But in terms of, right now, the existing stairway is in this area, and there's no garage, that kind of thing. But
okay, so I'm just gonna skip my photos of the site since you've been there and seen it, and nobody has any questions about what's on the site. So,
and I agree, it needs to be torn down. It's
you don't love it and think it's quaint?
It is really neat, but it's I think it'd be way too expensive to.
Right. So basically, we have on a street full of narrow, small lots, we have the narrowest, smallest lot, and on top of it, it's irregular.
It's a weird shape, yeah.
So to comply with setbacks on this lot would leave us with something like a 21-foot width within which to build a house, which is just not adequate to build a livable house. And to comply with the front and rear setbacks, we would have a 21-foot width and like a 20-foot depth. So we could build a 400 square foot little house on there, I guess.
It'd be like the Abbott's dry cleaner building.
Well, we could build a 4-story 400, something like that. I don't think people would like that very much either. And then we have this panhandle, which goes back here, which is proposed to all be open space in our plan, and it's next to the open space for this lot that's next door to us here. And then there's a big wall that's between here, and then the front portion of their open space, it has a roof over it. And then their whole unit, as you saw, is zero lot line up against us. So one of the choices that we looked at is, where do we site this thing? And what we decided to do was, since they're sort of backed up against us here, we decided it made sense to back up our building up against them and give the space to this side because this already had no windows on it and wouldn't be impacted anyway by proximity of our building to it, since zero lot line buildings go well against each other. So we made that design decision to back up this way, and that's what generates our request for mods along this side. So then we get to our building, and the requests for the modifications on the front and the back of the building are generated by this short depth that we have in the buildable portion of our lot. So we only have, 55 feet in the portion of our lot that's actually wide enough to put a structure. And so you can see what's generating the width of our garage down here. You're asking about the 24-foot width.
Mm-hmm.
The reason we did that is we're just matching the width of the house. It just stacks on itself. So it doesn't make sense to do the garage narrower and then build a house wider on top of it. If you're already excavating for it, you might as well excavate it and stack the walls. And so that's why we built it. To build the garage shorter wouldn't really change a whole lot of things anywhere on the site. It's the thing that's generating the depth of the garage is really, it's the depth of the house above in the first floor of the house. So you can see the rooms of the house are really at minimum depths. We don't have a huge kitchen. I mean, we're starting off not having a very large house to begin with overall. We've got a small bedroom, really a very minimal living room dimensions that they're furnishable, they're efficient, but this is not a huge extravagant living room in any way. We've got what's basically a galley kitchen with a little dining nook in it, and that's what's generating sort of this minimum dimension from front to back on this house. And shortening it would really starve these rooms. To take any space out of this bedroom would make it unusable. To really take any space out of this living room, what's really generating this space here is the stairs, and having to get enough space here to get enough risers to get stairs to a second story, not so much the depth of the living room. And so that's what generates this depth. We didn't set out and start with designing a 24 by 24 garage and then a house. We designed the house, and then that stacked onto this garage. So that's what generates that dimension.
In terms of the garage, there's like elevations and stuff, but I don't have a clear grading plan. But this is a question. The only part of the garage that's above grade is the face. Is
Correct.
That true?
That's right.
So is this really a cellar, or is it a basement?
It's
for our code?
It's completely buried. So I am not clear on whether it's a cellar or a basement. This is 100% underground.
I think it might be a basement.
So that's the next thing that I want to talk about here on this plan. This is just the second floor. Again, not huge rooms. It just stacks, not large. I mean, this master bath is very modest. And then we have this little loft in here and a little bit of a volume over that great room. And then we've got a roof. And, the height and everything, this was very critical when we went through HLC and we kept everything, really diminutive. This is an elevation of the whole block with our house put into it, so you can see how it fits in, and it fits in seamlessly with the rest of the block. Now, I'll talk about this later, but this portico was very important to HLC in terms of getting a more horizontal expression to the front elevation of this house, but I'm going to come back to that. Okay. I want to look at the sections here.
Yeah, see, this is the one, it looks like it's all underground, but okay.
It basically is. Okay, so this is our 3-story building. And they're calling this a 3-story building because it's 3 stories through here. And so that, I guess, technically makes the whole thing 3 stories per the ordinance. But in terms of all of these modifications, by the time that you get back here and we're talking about this modification, we're talking about a 3-story setback. But what this is, looking at it on the ground to anybody that looks at it, unless they have this plan set with them, is it's a 2-story building. It's the ground and 1-2 stories above the ground. And what this is to anybody looking at it here, unless they have this plan set with them, is it's the ground and 1-2 stories above the ground. So we call it a 3-story building, and it triggers these modifications, but effectively, visually, for all purposes and intents of why the ordinance applies the larger setbacks to 3-story buildings, this really is a 2-story building as viewed by anybody on the ground looking at it from any of these setbacks. So I
Which
think
for a
that's why
2-story would be 6 feet in the back, which you're still
Correct.
encroaching into that 6-foot area.
the staircase is encroaching into that, not the building.
Right.
So I'll touch on the staircase next, but I'm talking about the building setbacks right now. The modifications for the building are all part of this application too, and they're triggered by the fact that this is being defined as a 3-story building. So basically, obviously, we agree with staff's recommendation on all of those modifications for the building, and I think they're supportable because of what we just reviewed there. So now let's talk about where we're disagreeing with staff on this stairwell. So there seems to be 2 main bases why staff disagrees on the stairwell and the roof deck. And those are, number 1, staff asserts that the stairwell could be done in a conforming manner. And number 2, that the stairwell would and roof deck would impact the privacy of the adjacent neighbor. So as to the first question, we disagree that there's a place that any stairwell could be done that would be able to access that deck in a conforming manner. If you extend the setbacks out, there's nowhere outside here on this building that is outside of a 6-foot setback that an exterior staircase can be located and access
This
the deck.
setback goes to right here, and then this one would go out here.
Well, this setback continues here.
To where?
There's a 6-foot setback off of this,
Right.
and it ends there, and it goes to here.
No.
Well, this setback continues.
Why? Here's the property line. So it would be a 6-foot thing. Right, Joanne?
Well, I just
Or
wanted
do you-
to clarify
do you
a couple
go-
things. This is a 6-foot for ground floor portion, so this is in the 6-foot.
Right, and then it's 10 feet
It's 10
for anything
feet,
above
so
that.
the dwelling is actually in the rear setback, because I just wanted to clarify that from your prior statement. The dwelling is in the setback, but it's 6 feet from the property line, is because second and third story portions have to be set back 10 feet. So is this really an element that they have to have in order to have this? And as far as the courtyard, I reviewed the archive plans because it wasn't very clear, and it's just hard to see on the site what was behind here, and the archive plan showed it to be an open courtyard. However, if there's something in the building file that shows something else was here, it wasn't shown on the archive plans that I did review for the property, but it may have legally been constructed at a later date.
So all we know is what's there is we have this house, and there's maybe 12 feet of roof here, and this wall, and the staircase we're talking about would go right here next to this 0 lot line wall with no penetrations and this roof. And then this courtyard here is all covered. And then he's got an exterior staircase that goes to his roof deck. And then our roof deck would be up here. And again, it's a staircase. This isn't an area where people congregate and are going to be hanging out and looking down into this person's yard. This is a place where they are temporarily going up or down in a short period of time to go to a roof deck that is up and away and doesn't look into yards. And, whether or not it's something that, they need or not, I think is beside the point, because nobody needs a deck, but the city approves decks in people's yards all the time with modifications because they're appropriate improvements to lots. And they improve the quality of life on a lot, and they're consistent with development in the area. And certainly this is consistent with other development in the area. Lots of these other lots right next door have roof decks, and some of these decks are also in setbacks and look into other properties. This one wouldn't necessarily look into another property. We have letter from that same neighbor actually who has reviewed this and reviewed that deck and supports the project and doesn't have concerns about this particular element of the project. I think that is important in this case because privacy is of particular concern in this case. So that's the issue on the stairwell there. Plus, it's a spiral staircase, which isn't really conducive to people congregating on it. As for the doors, if it wasn't a door and it was a window, I don't see how that makes any change in whether it affects privacy. The bedroom is required to have egress, and it has to have a penetration, and staff doesn't oppose a window, and I don't see how having this door changes privacy versus a window. This is how tall is this wall?
Like 7 feet.
It's 7 feet tall, and again, it's only because this is a 10-foot setback because that's defined as a 3-story building. This is on the ground floor in reality. Now, the portico over here, we have a solid wall on the neighboring side of the portico to ensure that there is privacy between where this portico is and the adjacent property. And just to be clear, the adjacent property, that's us. That's our applicant is the owner of the adjacent property. And this was a critical factor to HLC's approval of this project.
They haven't approved it yet.
Well, their concept support of the project. They wanted this horizontal element to the project. We didn't have to have this for any reason of the design, but for aesthetics, it's very important to the HLC to have this horizontal feature of the project here. And
if I could add, one reason that the entry is where it is because, as you notice, like the natural grade is much higher than the sidewalk level. So there's a certain number of risers we have to meet to get into the house,
right,
and still provide a little bit of a landing so it doesn't come right to the front door. So we've tried to reduce that as much as we can. We're actually taking a little bit of grade out of the site to help with HLC's height requests. So that distance is start to dictate how we get to the entry, and to protect the entry, just from weather or direct sun coming in, that small covered area is doing that job protecting. But it's not enclosed because we still want to maintain that access to the backyard.
And this denotes a solid line or a solid wall, so there's no openings here.
right,
That's correct.
that's right.
And it's for privacy, and these are not doors; they're just gates.
Okay.
So you kind of see how, we're going to run that up as an arch, but it's just those shallow gates. So daylight still passes through. It's still from the sidewalk. It still feels as an open element. Kind of.
And one other quick thing on the roof deck. Wow, it sounds like they really cranked up the volume here. We have some flexibility on the placement of that deck. This deck could move all the way to this side of the roof. So the deck itself does not need to be in the setback. The deck can move here, and only this small pathway to it from the stairway to the deck could be in there. So if that's something that makes a difference in any way, we could certainly move this deck over because it functions the same way to us.
And the goal with that was to keep it below that ridge height so that it's not visible from the street.
That's why we put it here, but
considering the height, the angle looking up it is set back from that. So that's why we didn't want to pull it any further up to keep our mass scale bulk down.
And we didn't want any kind of a stairwell structure either that increased the height of the house, which is why we were going with this type of a stairwell versus something integral to the house that would require a tower element.
And I guess the only other element was just make clear that was the balcony that was referenced over the side yard setback. That's off the just a area for daylight to come into the bedroom.
And why does it need to be that versus a window?
Because it's so much nicer to be able to, have a door that opens and have glass that opens.
And just the aesthetics of the elevation. We have the elevation here.
That is, the balcony not allowed to have a shell extension over the setback.
No,
So
it
not a
does, but since
structure.
your setback's 10 feet, it can cantilever over 2 feet.
And that's a great point because we feel like
Where's that elevation done?
Here's the
Elevations
entry,
are
here's another.
forged.
No.
So,
Oh, there, right
when
there.
you view the house, again, it's a two-story everywhere. It's just that cellar component, basement component. And my understanding with the definition is a cellar is when it's fully enclosed and the basement actually opens out. Now ours, you can say it has daylight if the garage door is open and the entry door is open, then it kind of daylights, and that would be a basement. But so we felt like we're just trying to follow the letter of what's of the definition.
What I would do is that since it's noticed as all this, that you go and get whatever decision you get. And what you can do is then study our code and show what one your building complies with. Because if it's a cellar, it's a story, right? No, if it's a cellar, it's not a story. If it's a basement, it's a story. So
Exactly.
since you know your project and what, then the mod might not apply.
Well,
But it seems to me what staff's analyzed is that the way it's designed, it counts as a story per our code, and therefore those setbacks
That's fine.
are required.
I feel like just to address that, we did look into that in a lot of detail. Basements require that egress, and that would require more encroachment into the side yard setback, and because we have to have egress out of that
With
or to the back.
wells.
Okay.
So that's why we don't mind that it's fully buried, and then that definition in the city code qualifies that as a cellar. So that's why it's labeled as such.
Okay. All right. Great. Is that all you had?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Did we cover everything?
Yes.
All right, so I'd like to open the public hearing. I did receive one letter from a neighbor, I think, 331 East Cannon Perdido Street from Hugh Dow in support of the project. And so the only speaker slip I have is Lang Sai. Lang? You need to pick him up? Oh, you need to have him. Oh, you want to stand? Okay, because you've been sitting long enough. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Lang Sly. I live at and own the property at 309 East Cannon Perdido, so I'm half a block to the west of the subject property. And I just wanted to express my general support without addressing the merits of each of the modification agreements. Generally in support. It's a nice enhancement of our neighborhood, mixed-use neighborhood, and also to support the staff's willingness, the city's willingness to look at these modifications, these kind of modifications reasonably. We all know that in El Pueblo Viejo there are a lot of small lots. This being one of the smaller one, and it's just very difficult to do anything without some modifications being considered. So it's nice to see that the city's willing to do that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the staff hearing officer on 329 East Cannon Perdido? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Like I said, I did go out to the site and familiar with the neighborhood. Being it's relatively close to our building here, I do walk by it, that area, so. In regards to the modifications, like I said in the presentation when I hurried you along to not belabor the front setback modification request, and I know you did that because you've been before me before, and when properties or applicants request a front setback modification, we look at those with a lot more detail because it is private property, but it's part of the community, it's part of the neighborhood, the street setting and stuff. So it's really important to really be careful when we grant these kind of modifications. In your situation, as you pointed out, many of the properties in this area are built to the front property line. In addition, one thing you didn't mention, but that I did notice, is the grade difference in that to have a garage that was outside of the front setback, it would be a lot of grading. It would push back, the house, having the driveway come up, and you just don't have the area to put it anywhere else. So, and it is set back a little bit from the property. I was concerned when I was out there regarding the existing situation here, and you are rebuilding this wall, and there is a condition of approval in the staff report that requires you to provide the 10-foot visibility triangle or to get an administrative exception, and I see that there's been some discussions between you and staff that this wall will be removed, and then this balcony here be see-through the railing. So that's the way you're dealing with it at this time, but that condition is already put on. So in terms of the front setback modification, I feel it's appropriate and could make the findings for that request. In regards to the interior setback modification on this side of the property, I appreciate your design considerations, how this is a blank wall. You're pushing it towards the blank wall and having, do you call this west or south? Your north kind of.
We're kind of calling that south.
South, okay. So your south side is more of the living area, the outdoor area, and that, here's your open yard. So in regards to the garage, you're calling it, okay. So and the staff report is called the east. This is the east. So the modification to allow the new garage and the dwelling to be located within the required 10-foot interior setback, that's an appropriate improvement. It reflects the existing development on this side. I'm going to not talk about the exterior stairway or the roof deck right yet. In regards to the rear, in regards to the interior setback to the west, so that would be these improvements here. Again, in regards to the dwelling, I think it is an appropriate improvement. It improves the situation. It makes it still doesn't conform, but it's less non-conforming than it is now in terms of the dwelling. Then this says new balcony and steps. New balcony and steps, and then also there'd be the entry portico on this side, right? In regards to the steps being in the interior setback, given the constraints of the site, the narrowness of it, the location of the proposed house, this is where it is. And again, because of the grade difference, you need steps to get up to the front house, so the steps are appropriate. In regards to the entry portico, I know the existing entrance is right here, so it's already oriented towards this house, although the house starts back here. I go back and forth because I understand completely why staff's recommending denial of this portion of the project. It is a structure, it's a major structure. It's more than just an awning covering the entrance deck or entrance to your house. But I do understand your design desires in terms of providing shelter when you're coming in, and if you have bags and stuff and you're trying to get your keys in the door and it's raining once we're out of the drought, it provides shelter. And then I questioned you regarding whether this is a solid wall or not, and you said it was. So I actually can support this modification because you didn't provide pictures, but I did take some pictures while I was out on the site. When you look at the neighbors, and I understand that it's the owner of the site, but the owner's not always going to live there. So, that benefits you right now because they're not complaining about the project, but, they're not going to be the long term. So I need to look long term. So here's this, and here's the house, and I didn't really think about taking a picture, but you see there's lots of windows. And so when you have this interaction and people coming to your front door, I think this would provide some buffer and noise reduction in terms of people, hi, how are you? And you want to buy my cookies or what? I think that given the narrowness in the site, that this is appropriate. In regards to the balcony, again, I will understand why staff's saying no. Because in the majority of the situations, it's not conducive. My question is, why couldn't this, based on your response and why it's necessary, why couldn't this type of thing be on the back of the house where it's not in the setback?
Is that for me to address? Mm-hmm. Because of how the room would function inside, a bed would be against this wall because this is a loft space and the roof is coming down very steeply to keep this volume as low as possible. But we would still like to be able to take advantage of that southern light. So I apologize about that earlier. So that's what this window. So the idea is, the bed is oriented so you can actually see. So it's a function of the architecture interior that kind of drives how the outside, because they're not separate pieces. They all intertwined together. So the furniture layout works here, and that's what allows the request for this balcony on the side, on the west side.
Now, the term Juliet balcony wasn't used anywhere, but is this considered a Juliet balcony, or are they narrower? I mean, does it have to be 1.5 feet? Could it be?
That's it's obviously not enough to. You can't put potted plants on it. I mean, it's really just for the doors to be able to open, and we still have the. We don't feel like there's a privacy issue with the house below because there's already that 6-foot fence along the side. So
but this is the second. This is the second story, or the third story, depending if you call it 1, 2 story.
It's a good point, though. The balcony is not intended to be a living space. It is intended purely to allow an opening
for daylight.
So and egress. So it doesn't have to be as deep as that necessarily. If that is critical to your finding for a mod, we could make it shallower. I think Fred Sweeney in SFDB hearing I was at, where we were specifically looking at a Juliet balcony. I think it was 24 inches was what he was talking about
so
as the depth.
Wider than this, because this is 1.5 feet.
I think so.
This must be 18 inches, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
But clearly, our clear intent, which is on the record here, is not for, and obviously by the width, is not for people to hang out on that balcony and stand around.
And Joanne, a zoning question. Well, it's 5'8". Let's just say that this was 6 feet. A cantilevered feature like this could encroach 2 feet into the interior, correct? Okay.
And I'm sorry, this one is 6 feet to the setback. The 5'8" is to the edge of this, so we had a little buffer between the property line.
Oh, I see. Okay, so it is 6 feet.
It is 6 feet,
Okay.
so that's held back to that two-story setback.
Okay. Well, like I said, I could understand why staff recommended not or didn't support this. I mean, but in this situation, given the existing development around the design of this, the style of it, HLC's direction, I could support these two elements. So now we get back to the back area here, which is the rear setback. There's a number of elements. There's this first story door, which it's on the ground floor. I could support that. It's not, whether it's a door or a window, there's this height, like you indicated in your testimony, that 6 or 7 foot tall wall all the way, and it's solid. It's not a wood fence. That any interaction here, you can use your interior setbacks. Just because you have a setback doesn't mean you can't use it. And so, yes, this door would facilitate the use, but it's still there. So I could support the setback modification for that. And in terms of the building itself, I can support all the modifications for the buildings. That makes the most sense. In regards to the improvements on the second and third floor, I agree with staff in terms of the spiral deck, the spiral staircase, and the deck. They are nice amenities, but it's not a necessary improvement. There is, I see a roof deck in the front of the house, too. That's proposed. But I think that the potential off-site impacts regarding the roof deck in the setback, and then the stairways associated with it, and you need the stairway, that would cause adverse impacts to the neighbor. And I understand that there is an existing covered area. Joanna had indicated her cursory review she couldn't see a permit for that covered area, but this is their open yard or open area, and so I can't support that element of the project, which would be then the second story door, because that wouldn't be necessary anymore. However, if it was a window for ventilation, that would be okay. But the deck, the stairway and the deck, I can't get there. So in regards to the findings, I would want to add for the front setback modification, add a statement that also reflects the grade difference between the property and the sidewalk, that's a reason why that the front setback modification is appropriate. In regards to the second finding, where it says, the staff hearing officer finds that the east interior setback modification for all requested items except for the exterior stairway that leads to the roof deck, the new bedroom doors, I'm going to cross that out because that's on the first floor and that I can find is okay. The new bathroom door is not necessary anymore.
May I ask you if that could also be a Juliet balcony?
What? No.
Because again, it's a bathroom, so it's not going to be a clear glass piece that for
But
privacy.
you don't need a Juliet bath.
But it's it is nice to have daylight in a master bath.
We can change it to a window, clear story window, but not a Juliet balcony. So I can cross out the new bathroom door and add in. We'll have to add probably in the project description the clear story window in the bathroom. No, that's the rear. Okay, so that's in the rear, because we're talking about this thing right here, right now. So the new bedroom, so it's true the new bathroom door is not.
I think they're both in the interior.
Okay, well, I'll work on the findings. Okay, so I'll let you know what I approved. Okay, I'll let you know what I didn't approve. I didn't approve this door, but it could be a clear story window. I didn't approve the stairs, and I didn't approve the roof deck. But in terms of the entry portico and this Juliet balcony, that's okay. And those are the 4 elements you were recommending denial?
Yeah, it was the portico
1, 2,
and the balcony.
3, and and then all these.
And the bedroom door, but you've already
The
said
bedroom
that's
door is
okay.
fine. And this isn't, the door's not necessary, but I understand you may need a window in there, so a clear story window. So you got 50-50.
Can I just get a little clarity?
Mm-hmm.
A roof deck itself is not the problem. The concern is the roof deck in this portion.
Correct. And then how to get to it.
Okay.
And I don't, maybe, if you can figure out, I don't have concerns with it being against this wall. Okay, I have concerns with it being here. This is the concern I have, is this area here.
Right.
So I don't know how you would get to it. But if you could find a way to get to it that conforms to the zoning ordinance, I could approve the portion of the roof deck within this interior setback. So then you don't have to come back, because it wouldn't be found in substantial conformance because I denied it. But I could approve it in this one, just not in this area.
So could you just say approve a roof deck within the interior setback?
Well, this is the east. This is what they're calling the east.
That's correct.
So except for the stairway that leads to the roof deck, new bedroom doors I'm allowing. The new bathroom door is not okay. And I could put the roof deck is, move that as being, or just take that out because that's not, because it says except for the exterior stairway that leads to the roof deck, except for the new bathroom door. So the other improvements that are showing is okay.
And if I may ask, just for my own understanding fully, since it's not a place, like if the roof deck were pulled back and it's a circular stair, it's not a place where you can congregate. So it's not a congregation place within the rear or side setback. It's strictly just an access, and it's only to the 2 stories at that point. This is grade. There's nothing below the bottom level. So you're not opposed to the access to a potential roof deck. It's that access in that corner? Or is
I don't think that's
that,
necessary within the setback. Your site's so small, it's so constrained.
and that's why we would really like to have a roof deck, again.
We have one out front. You have something that you can do. You have your open art area back here. I just don't think, I need to move to the next.
Okay.
I just don't think that is.
I'm concerned with just leaving the roof deck in because some staff is going to interpret that later as, oh, well, because they didn't approve this, they were unapproving the roof deck. If you could say specifically that a roof deck within this setback is supported, that would be better rather than leaving it to be passive and interpreted.
Okay.
I would
Well,
prefer
Joanne
that.
would be the one that
within
would.
the interior,
Yeah.
not within the rear setback.
And then as long as access can be provided outside of setbacks.
Roof within east.
I just want to clarify this for the rear setback, because I understand the interior, you're willing to allow that. But this setback here for the roof deck would have to be 10 feet, so do you want it entirely out of the rear setback? So entirely out and allow something
In the interior setback. Yeah, okay, we're clear on
You
that.
have to figure out access.
Great, okay.
Okay, so my action is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 calendar days. And they also have oversight authority of all my actions. And if they felt that warranted additional discussion before them, they'd call it up during that same 10-day appeal period. And if that was to occur, Joanne would contact you. Okay?
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks.
So now we'll go to the last item, which is 1526 La Vista del Oceano. Okay. I have one too. And the other ones are attached. You can just keep them. Anytime you're ready, Dave.
Okay.
Is it still morning?
It is 45 more minutes. Yeah.
Just kidding.
All right, good morning. This is David Eng, planning technician for this project. This project is located at 1526 La Vista del Oceano Drive. It's a lot located in the E3 zone, 505 square feet, currently developed with a 1,058 square foot one-story house with a detached 219 square foot one-car garage. The applicant and owner are requesting, or they have a proposal for a new two-story addition and additional remodels to the house. These include a first floor addition of 171 square feet in these areas. On the second floor, there's a proposed addition of 617 square feet in this area, and this is all to be conforming to setbacks. Due to the amount of square footage that they are proposing, it will exceed 50% of what is currently existing habitable space. So they need to bring up their parking to meet the requirement for two covered parking spaces on this property. There currently is the one-car garage located at the property line. So they are proposing a new conforming two-car garage to be located in the property line. The applicant is requesting a front setback modification for this garage to be located in the front setback. It'll be a 20-foot encroachment. There is also a interior 6-foot setback here, and they are encroaching 4 feet 6 inches into this setback. The existing house was permitted, however, after the work was done and due to just the finished materials and the way the house was actually done, it actually encroaches about 2 inches into the front setback. As part of the project, the applicant is requesting to change out an existing window located at this facade, making it adding French doors with a Juliet balcony and an eyebrow roof to be covering that element above it. Staff is recommending approval of the requested modifications due to the limited impacts that this new garage will have on this existing neighbor. This neighbor currently does face this existing one-car garage on this side. with regards to the improvements on this facade, these improvements face the street and are not anticipated to have any significant impacts on this neighbor or any neighbors across the way. The Single Family Design Board was supportive of the design of the Juliet balcony and the French doors as part of the overall design for the proposed additions and remodels. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay. And you're not proposing any conditions, right?
No, no conditions.
All right, great, thanks. Would you like to state your name for the record and provide additional comments?
Yes, my name is Don Swan. I'm a designer on the project, and the project came, just a little background on it, was that the project came to the Architecture Board through a different designer. The owner was from Arizona, and he had an architect from Arizona that did the first presentation. And what the presentation actually was for just for the with the single car garage existing, and then adding an open one car carport, or not carport, just a open space parking. And when they first went through the Single Family Design Board, they kind of approved that system. They were going to go along with it. But when I got involved with it, and we observed the existing garage, that it just was impossible to leave it stay with all the activity that's going to be happening, because it's crumbling in the foundation and in the wall structure. So this is what prompted us to look at it and said, let's do the real thing. And since we're adding more than 50%, that it causes a little bit of a dilemma there. And of course, before the first project, it was only 83% FAR, and this, by adding the existing garage, it bumped us to the 93% or 94%. So that's what really made that happen, and we felt that that was more important to provide the two covered parking space on this street, since the street itself has other garages that are similar in fashion with what we're doing.
Well, it's narrow and there's not much on-street parking.
Right, exactly, that's correct. And that was one comment that the chair of the Single Family Design Board mentioned, that the garage structures on the street look like they're two cars, and this would kind of match the same similarity of the street. So that's why we went this far, and it will be a great improvement for the property. Another little thing that we're doing is we're redoing the front retaining wall, since it's over impacting itself because of the shape of the wall. It's kind of overturning. They put in these supports at one time, and it's began to overturn. So they decided to cut it back a little bit, so we maybe give a little more parking space in front where we have
no parking in the front yard.
Yeah, so it just simplifies it a little bit. So. No, not in the front yard.
There's no parking allowed in the front yard.
No, we're in the street. But actually, the wall actually encroaches into the street anyway. So,
oh, really?
Yeah,
yeah, I see, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's basically it.
Okay, great. I'd like to open the public hearing and see no one. Have we received any letters on this property?
No, we have not received any correspondence on this project.
Okay, so I'll close the public hearing. I did go out to the site, and actually the only question I have, and this picture you submitted illustrates it very well. The car, and it was narrow, backing out, is it really going to be possible? So then I questioned whether it could be pushed back or not. Not the full setback, but, I don't know, 2-3 feet. And transportation staff, you checked with transportation staff, David?
Yes, so transportation staff have reviewed this project. They do agree that, yes, due to the width of the roadway and the fact that cars are parked in a portion of that, the area is a bit tight, and it's a not quite ideal situation for parking. However, they did feel that it was adequate enough for maneuverability to get in and out of the new garage spaces. I presented the suggestion of moving the garage back, and it was their opinion that gaining the additional foot or two by doing that would not give a significant amount of benefit in terms of adding for better maneuverability.
Okay, what about widening the doors so that you can kind of have a bit more room to swing, or I guess what I don't have I'm supportive of the modification on the front property line. I respect transportation staff opinion that pushing it back is not going to help any. I would encourage you to look at it a little more and review with transportation staff to see if you widen it a little bit, if that would help with the backing out, and then maybe request a substantial conformance determination. Since they're okay with it as it is, as proposed, and like you showed with the pictures, and when I was out there on the site, it's consistent with the neighborhood. It's not going to impact the neighbors. But just if it helps the usability of it, and for the property owner, that might be.
And with the owners, I'll check with them too.
Yeah, to see if making it a little wider, and then if it does work, then discuss with staff about a substantial conformance. I mean, if you're going to make it 5 feet wider, that's not substantial conformance. But if it's like a foot or two, just to make the doors a little wider, I think that could be found.
One solution to that would be to have just a single door, but then that wouldn't conform with the neighborhood as far as the way they look down the street. They all have individual doors on it, so that would be the only complaint. So we'll see if we can make it wider. The one thing we have to consider is the fact that when we come to the top, we don't want to impact our front as much as so.
Yeah, and I realize that's why I'm not going to put it as a condition. It's just balancing, like the first project. It's a balancing act of everything on the site and how it fits. But I would be supportive in this instance. Like I also said in another project, we always want it to be the minimum. So I like that you started off with minimum, and it's kind of weird for me to say go bigger,
Sure.
But I think in this instance, it might make it a little better.
Sure.
So I can make the findings outlined in the staff report. Staff's not proposing any conditions, but I am going to put a condition on it. There's not a request and to be using this as a roof deck, and it's not used now. So I'm going to put a condition that
it's not.
Yeah, the roof of the deck should.
Not in their plans.
Now what? Is it going to be a flat roof like what that is now, or is it going to be? Is there a way it could be designed so that it would prohibit access to it, or no?
It wouldn't fit the neighborhood again to match the existing ones that are there. It's just going to be, just a roofing material, just gravel on hot mop on.
Okay, so what the condition will be is that the roof of the deck shall not be used. No, sorry, the roof of the garage shall not be used as a roof deck without further review and approval by the city, because there wasn't a part of the modification request.
Right. Okay, perfect.
And what if I added, and the material of the roof shall discourage,
the structure won't be, let's say, capable of handling a deck as well. Just strong enough to take care of the what they call them, the dead loads.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then I'll just leave it that it shall not be used as a deck without further review with the city.
Right. Very good.
So with that condition, I'll approve your project. And like I said on the other ones, my action is appealable to the Planning Commission within 10 calendar days, and they also have oversight authority of all my actions. And if they felt this warranted additional discussion before them, they could call it up during that same 10-day appeal period. And if either of those would occur, David will contact you.
Great.
Okay?
Very good.
Sure. I adjourn the meeting.